Good, after good afternoon, everyone. Great to be with you. Last time I checked, we had over 400, I think, in fact, approaching 500 people registered to attend this webinar on the governance of safeguarding, which is wonderful engagement, and we thank you for it. My name's Steve Edmonds, and I'm presenting this afternoon alongside my colleague, Rani Kaur, from whom you'll be hearing a little later. And if you've not attended one of our webinars before, or indeed if you have, here's just a brief reminder of how they work. They're probably the least interactive of all our events. They are delivered really as lectures. This one's due to last for 40 minutes. We do encourage you to use the chat function. Please submit any questions and comments through the chat, and we'll get back to you by email with any specific questions and queries that you may have. We'll respond to those. Because it's us talking to you, you'll be muted, but you will be sent the links to the slides with the resources that we mention following the webinar. We'll be recording this, and that recording will be made available shortly on our website in that section which contains all our webinars. So do check that out. There's some great content in that area as well, and please do make the most of that. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to cover this afternoon, and I'm going to try and provide a broad overview of the safeguarding responsibilities of governing boards. Rani will then come in and talk about how those responsibilities are met in practice, and then I'll come back briefly and talk about the approach that we can take as boards to monitoring and oversight to ensure that our safeguarding arrangements and culture is indeed the best that it can be. So we hope that all that content will be of use to you, and it indeed supplements the safeguarding training and information and support you receive on your own governing board. We anticipate that a number of you who are joining us this afternoon actually have that specific role as the safeguarding governor or trustee. And we know that you take that responsibility very seriously, but it's really important for us to convey this afternoon that the board collectively retains that responsibility for making sure that safeguarding is followed and that the safeguarding culture in your school or trust is the right culture. It's not a responsibility that rests on one person's shoulders. You know that, but I think it's important that we convey that throughout the webinar to this afternoon. So finally, before we get into the actual content, I should say that what we're covering today draws heavily on the resources that NGA produce on the governance of safeguarding, which you'll find on our website in that area what we call the Knowledge Centre. So we have a guide to safeguarding for governing boards in all types of school structure, which is well used and highly regarded and fairly easy to follow. So we would certainly recommend that you use that to embed any learning that you get out of this webinar. And we have some accompanying resources as well, including a role description for those of you who carry out that really important role of safeguarding governor or trustee. So please do take some time to check out our resources after this webinar, and we hope that that will complement and indeed embed what we have to say to you this afternoon. So let's begin the webinar proper, shall we? And we're going to start with the basics. And you're joining us this afternoon because you know that your school and the governing boards have a very important responsibility to safeguard and promote the welfare of the children and young people that you educate. I can't think of a more important responsibility in governance than that, actually. And what that means is that you have to have regard to a very important statutory guidance that's called Keeping Children Safe in Education. Now, at first glance, keeping children safe in education might seem a daunting read or a daunting prospect to navigate. but it is a well-structured piece of guidance. It has 5 clear sections, which you can see there on the screen, which allow those reading it to pick out quite clearly and understand what their specific responsibilities are for safeguarding the welfare of children and young people in their schools and trusts. If you work in a school at any level, then you are expected to read at least part 1 of this guidance, which deals with the safeguarding information for all staff. There is a condensed annex contained in the guidance, which summarises part 1 to help embed the content of that section. If you govern in a school or trust, then because we have the overall collective responsibility for safeguarding, then it's recommended that we read through and familiarise ourselves with the whole thing, with the whole guidance. Now, many of you I know will have been asked to sign a form or some type of confirmation that you've read at least part 2 of the guide, which covers the management of safeguarding and indeed deals with the specific areas of governing responsibility. So that includes policy development, the responsibility that you have to produce policies and procedures that support safeguarding, child protection, pupil behaviour, staff behaviour, safer recruitment, things like that. The responsibility that you have indeed to make sure that all staff have read at least part 1 of Keeping Children Safe in Education, and generally all the responsibilities that amount to what we call a whole school approach to safeguarding, making sure that safeguarding and child protection underpin all the relevant aspects of school life and school policy. So that is why it's important that those of us who govern read and familiarise ourselves with the whole of Keeping Children Safe in Education, although indeed section 2, which covers the management of safeguarding, is probably what you would call the go-to section for our roles and responsibilities. And now it's important also that we don't just skim Keeping Children Safe in Education on one occasion and then tick that box and say that we've done it, because it's a constantly evolving guidance, a constantly evolving set of guidance, and it's updated on a regular basis. And in fact, the latest version of Keeping Children Safe in Education came into effect in September, as I'm sure you all know, and that brought changes to all sections of the guidance, and indeed changes to that section 2, which I mentioned a few moments ago is probably the most important aspect of Keeping Children Safe in Education. But what I'm going to major on are the 4 changes, the 4 main changes that took place in this update that relate to the things that we have here on this screen. So on this slide rather. So the first change there relates to child-on-child sexual violence and sexual harassment. And what the Department for Education have done in this update is that they have incorporated the standalone guidance that they published previously on how schools deal with sexual violence and sexual harassment, and they absorbed that within Keeping Children Safe in Education. Now, you'll understand and be aware of the backdrop to this and the very serious issues that were raised last year and highlighted through the Everyone's Invited campaign, and just the real risk that some children and students are under, for harassment and sexual violence. So it's a very serious issue, and it's quite logical that separate guidance will be absorbed within Keeping Children Safe in Education. The other main change relates to online safety. Again, another high profile and serious issue. So that is about limiting children's exposures to risks through the school's IT system. And what that actually means for us in practice is making sure that the school has the necessary filtering and monitoring systems in place, and that those systems remain effective. The third change relates to safer recruitment. The third main change relates to safer recruitment. Again, safer recruitment is an established and embedded part of keeping children safe in education. And so schools are used to ensuring that there is rigour, safeguarding rigour in their recruitment processes. What that means in practice is usually that there are at least 2 people shortlisting for positions. That process ensures that there is a scrutiny of any gaps or inconsistencies in an application, and that those inconsistencies and gaps are explored to ensure that there is no underlying issue that could pose a safeguarding risk to our children and young people. So what the change to keeping children safe in education is saying is that now schools should consider carrying out an online search on their shortlisted candidates to help identifying using the information that's available publicly online to strengthen that process and ensure that there are no underlying risks that may go undetected. And the fourth main change there is probably the most significant for those of us that govern. And Ronnie's going to talk a little bit more about this in detail, but I'll just flag this change, and that is an expectation, a much clearer expectation in the guidance that governors and trustees receive appropriate training in child protection and safeguarding, and that starts with our induction, and then it's regularly updated so that we have the knowledge and the confidence to provide that level of strategic challenge to our school leaders and our safeguarding leaders, so that we can ensure that the safeguarding and welfare of our children and young people is being maintained at all times. So all of keeping children safe in education, or all the sections of keeping children safe in education, have been updated in some way. I haven't got time to take us through all of the changes, but I wanted to highlight those main changes, and it's worth just perhaps touching base with your school leaders and with your designated safeguarding leads. We'll talk about them a little bit later, just to ensure how those changes have been incorporated into our own policies. So moving on, I wanted to talk a little bit more generally about keeping children safe in education as guidance and how we use it, because what the guidance doesn't do is provide us with a step-by-step instruction manual, if you like, for the governance of safeguarding. It doesn't tell us in any real detail how we go about doing our role in practice. But what it does do that's really, really important is give us some very clear prompts and provides a framework for us as governing boards of actions and an approach that we take through our practice that ensure the requirements of keeping children safe in education are met. So what you will find in keeping children safe in education is a clear steer on how we take a whole school approach to safeguarding through our governance. And through our governance, we should be ensuring that our pupils are being taught about the way they keep themselves safe, including online safety, which I mentioned a few moments ago. that there are clear processes in our school and trust to identify pupils who might be vulnerable with their own psychological well-being, for example. That we have those safety recruitment procedures that ensure that people who pose a potential risk don't slip through the net and into employment in our schools and trusts, that our staff know what their responsibilities are because they've read at least part one of Keeping Children Safe in Education, and that they are being continually updated and trained through a rigorous program of CPD to ensure that they know what those responsibilities are at all times, and that we have employed, or we have appointed rather, a suitable senior member of staff with that status, with that training, and with that knowledge to be the designated safeguarding lead, the person who ensures on the ground that these things are happening. And again, Ronnie will talk a little bit more about that. Through our policies and our strategic governance, we're ensuring that we have clear policies in place that cover child protection, pupil behaviour, staff behaviour, and safer recruitment. All those policies should have a commonality, a thread through them, which is safety, well-being, and welfare, and they should be very clear about how they, in their context, are keeping our pupils, our children and young people safe, and that indeed we are meeting our wider obligations to keep children safe by ensuring that they are prevented from the threat of the vulnerability, the threat of extremism, and extremism comes in many forms. So as a governing board, we can ensure that our curriculum and our pastoral support systems function effectively to ensure that our pupils are prevented from that risk of radicalisation in any way, shape, or form. And also, we have a very important duty to ensure that the single central record, which, as the name suggests, is the school's record of safeguarding checks carried out on employees and other relevant people, is up to date and is effective. Now, we get asked a lot about the governing board's role in ensuring that single central record is up to date and effective. And we always say, as I'm sure you've heard, that it's not our job as governors or trustees to check the record ourselves, but it is our job to ask the questions about how complete the record is, how it is reviewed by the school, through the designated safeguarding lead and others, and how it is stored and kept up to date in the school. So it's our job to ask those really clear questions about how this job is being done, not do the job ourselves. Now, one way that we can ensure that is done appropriately, I would suggest, is to ask about the level of external validation and scrutiny. So do we have, or have we, as a school or trust, access to some form of independent expert safeguarding support that comes in and gives an independent outside validation of that single central record, which will give the board the level of confidence, as well as the leadership, that it's been maintained. And of course, we've mentioned just how important it is to look after our own safeguarding knowledge and expertise, but through regular training. So keeping children safe in education is not a step-by-step guide, but it does give us a blueprint to do all these things, which if we do them well, demonstrate our compliance, demonstrate our leadership, but also promote that whole school safeguarding culture. We're creating the conditions where the welfare, the overriding concern we have for our children and young people runs through all elements of school's life. It can be seen in our processes, it can be seen in our policies, it can be seen in a way that our pupils feel confident to raise concerns about their own safety or the safety of others, and articulate their concerns and feelings, particularly when they're feeling vulnerable, and an environment where our staff feel confident and remain vigilant at all times and understand what risk looks like and understands how to act upon risk. So that's what we're trying to achieve through governance, to ensure that the safety and the welfare of our pupils is paramount at all times. That's what our responsibilities are. And I think I should mention school inspection at this point, because we are held quite rightly to account for the way that we do it through the school inspection system. Inspectors will make a judgment on how effective our safeguarding arrangements are under the category or the judgment of leadership and management, and I'll do that in the way that inspectors do, by gathering evidence from a range of sources. So when they talk to governing boards during the inspection process, and as many governors and trustees as possible, of course, they'll also probably want to talk to that safeguarding link governor or a trustee and get their particular insight about how the board is doing all those things I've just mentioned, and making sure that the safeguarding procedures are being properly followed. And if that isn't evident to the inspectors, there isn't sufficient evidence of that, or indeed they come across concerns, then that is likely, almost certainly, to lead to an inadequate judgment for leadership and management, which makes the school or organisation vulnerable. You don't need me to tell you that. So I think I've set out there fairly comprehensively what our responsibilities are and where our spine of attention should be. So I think Rani's going to talk a little bit more now about how those are met in practice. Rani.
Thanks, Steve. Hello, everyone. So I will just move our slides across. Okay, so I'm going to start by talking about policies and procedures. As you all know, good policies and procedures will help ensure that schools and trusts can take appropriate action to safeguard and promote the welfare of their pupils. The key policy to start with is the child protection policy. Now, amongst other things, this should reflect the whole school approach to peer-on-peer abuse, contain details on reporting systems and other procedures, and refer to locally agreed multi-agency safeguarding arrangements. The child protection policy should be reviewed and updated annually as a minimum. It's often done just as keeping children safe in education is updated. That's normally a good time to review your child protection policy as well. It needs to be publicly available, and schools and trusts will often do this through publication on their website. The child protection policy is the key policy, but there are other policies that will contain elements of safeguarding. So these include the staff code of conduct, which will set out expected behaviour of staff, including staff-pupil relationships and the use of technology. The behaviour policy, which should give particular thought to the school's response to bullying and encompass the school's procedures for searching, screening and confiscation. And also the safer recruitment and selection policy and procedure. So this should include details of the required recruitment checks and procedures that must be carried out. And it should also include the new expectation, as Steve's mentioned, that has come out of keeping children safe in education, that requires schools and trusts to carry out an online search on shortlisted candidates, which from a governing board perspective, you will especially need to be aware of when you are recruiting a senior executive leader. So what governing boards should consider when approving policies? Boards will need to look at the context of their setting. So are there particular safeguarding concerns that are more prevalent in your community? For example, something like county lines or FGM. If so, is this reflected in your school's policies and procedures? Boards should be thinking about how prominent safeguarding is in all of their schools' policies. So where appropriate, do policies beyond the ones that I've already mentioned consider safeguarding? Do your policies convey to pupils, parents and staff how important safeguarding is to the school? Boards should be looking at how policies are drafted. So is your setting engaging with other local schools and other bodies such as the local authority or the police? And within your own school or trust, you will have staff that would have built their expertise by undertaking safeguarding training and from generally managing safeguarding concerns on a daily basis. And so it's really important that staff are given the opportunity to contribute and shape safeguarding arrangements and the child protection policy. A note just in relation to MATs. So when we are talking about policies, some trusts will have trust-wide policies, and these will apply equally to all schools within the trust. Some may have a trust-wide policy to act as a foundation that can then be tweaked for each school within the trust, or some may have school-specific policies. Now, whatever approach is chosen, trust boards should be confident that the child protection policy is effective. So once you have the right policies in place, it's important that this is followed up with the right practice. So governors and trustees should be confident that staff know what their responsibilities are. And so from a board perspective, you should be asking about whether staff had received relevant training and what steps are being taken to ensure that this training is cascaded, embedded and practiced. In relation to the board themselves, governors and trustees must know what their responsibilities are and what they need to do to meet them. Training designed to build their knowledge and understanding on this topic is therefore essential. So safeguarding training should cover the duties that schools and trusts have to safeguard and promote the welfare of children, the governing board's relationship with the DSL, your designated safeguarding lead, and effective safeguarding monitoring, including how to review any data that you receive in relation to safeguarding. As a starting point, as Steve's mentioned, governors and trustees should be reading and understanding keeping children safe in education. Additional training could include webinars like this one, reading guidance documents, or completing e-learning modules. Boards could also ask their DSL to deliver some training. Now, this will of course need to be different to the operational training delivered to staff, but it will help the board understand their role. Monitoring visits will also give you the opportunity to see how safeguarding works in practice. But again, whatever form the training takes, it needs to be tailored to governance. And so it needs to cover strategic oversight and not the day-to-day management of safeguarding done by staff. It needs to help the board provide strategic challenge to assure themselves that safeguarding policies and procedures are effective. And it should take into account your specific context. When talking about local academy committees or local governing bodies in MATs, it should also look at what the board's delegated responsibilities are. And it also needs to be tailored to the needs of the different board members. For example, a lead safeguarding governor or trustee will require more detailed training. Once boards have built this knowledge and understanding, they will be better equipped to meet their safeguarding responsibilities. So safeguarding is an area where effective oversight is crucial. And so there are a number of designated roles required to ensure that the right steps are taken, both in school and also from a board's perspective. The first one I'll cover is the lead governor or trustee. So keeping children safe in education requires governing boards to appoint a member of the board to take leadership responsibility for safeguarding arrangements. This governor or trustee should have the required knowledge, skills and expertise and be sufficiently qualified and experienced to take on this role. Steve will go into more detail on how this role works in practice, but I do just want to talk about how this role works within MATs. So the requirement relates to the accountable board. And so in a maintained school or a single academy trust, it's relatively straightforward. This will be the governing body or the trust board. Therefore, the board would simply appoint a safeguarding governor or trustee to carry out this role. In MATs, the approach will largely depend on what delegated powers each local academy committee has. If they have a role in monitoring safeguarding, it would follow that each academy committee also appoints a safeguarding lead to help maintain trust-wide oversight. The trust board would of course still need to appoint a lead trustee, and the safeguarding leads from the local academy committees would feed back to this lead trustee. This approach will help the trust board oversee safeguarding arrangements in individual schools whilst maintaining trust-wide oversight. Steve has already mentioned the requirement to appoint a DSL, but I'm just going to talk a bit about what they do in practice. So the DSL will be the member of staff responsible for overseeing safeguarding arrangements in school. And so they will be a key resource when it comes to creating the school or trust safeguarding policies and resources and procedures. In addition to a DSL, there should also be one or more deputies. At least one of these individuals should always be available during school hours to discuss any safeguarding concerns. Other duties for the DSL beyond feeding into policies and procedures and dealing with safeguarding day to day include liaising with external agencies, so agencies such as social services, and acting as a point of contact for them. Working with other school staff, such as the SENCO on safeguarding matters. Keeping the head teacher informed of safeguarding issues and ongoing inquiries, and providing support, advice, and expertise for all staff. The DSL will be the person in the school that all staff should be talking to if they have any safeguarding concerns. One last specific role governors and trustees need to be aware of is a designated teacher for looked after and previously looked after children. So looked after children are those that are in the care of the local authority. For example, they may be living with a foster family. Many of these pupils are likely to have suffered disrupted learning, and so a designated teacher must be appointed with responsibility for promoting the educational achievement of these pupils. It's vital that the designated teacher has appropriate training and the relevant qualifications and experience. And they should also work closely with the DSL to ensure that any safeguarding concerns regarding looked after and previously looked after pupils are quickly and effectively responded to. Governing boards should, through the designated teacher, hold the school to account for how it supports its looked after and previously looked after pupils. In some schools, designated teachers will do this by providing the governing board with a regular report. But given the variation in the number of looked after and previously looked after pupils a school may have at any one time, a flexible approach to this monitoring may be necessary. Final point before I hand back to Steve is about safeguarding and the curriculum. So schools have an important role in helping pupils recognise, understand and develop resilience to the risks around them. It's therefore essential that the school's curriculum teaches pupils about safeguarding. Any curriculum should therefore cover aspects such as mental health, physical health, well-being and online safety. So I'll pass back over to Steve now. Thank you.
Thank you, Rani. And I'm just going to move on my screen or move on my slide deck. That's great. To talk about strategic oversight and monitoring, if I may. And I think given the level of responsibility and the significance of the responsibilities that we as boards have for safeguarding, then it goes without saying that the way we monitor and oversee these responsibilities has to be rigorous, it has to be visible, but it also has to be well organised as well. But it also has to serve a primary purpose, and that is allowing us as governing boards to see clearly that our schools and trusts are complying with keeping children safe in education, of course, but also that we're able to answer these fundamental questions using the data and the evidence at our disposal. You know, what are our strengths, our safeguarding strengths and areas for development? How do we know that? How are those issues become clear? What are our processes for understanding that? How are we acting decisively, whether it's through policy development, procedures or practice to address safeguarding issues or just improve the level of safeguarding rigor and effectiveness in our schools and trusts? And then, of course, what does implementation look like on the ground? How are our leaders, our safeguarding leaders in particular, communicating to our staff the expectations and the developments in terms of policy and procedure and process so that they are being effectively implemented in a way that keeps our children and young people safe and has that overriding concern for their welfare. So if our safeguarding monitoring and oversight is effective, it should be able to tell us those things clearly, allow us to ask those questions, but also answer them quite decisively as well. And some guiding principles really to help us in the way that we organise our monitoring and oversight. Really, there's three principles really that we mention in our safeguarding guidance: observe, listen, and discuss. Observe the data and evidence that comes your way through the executive reporting from your school leaders, from your designated safeguarding leads, the additional reporting and evidence, whether that's a reporting of safeguarding incidents, attendance of all your pupils, particularly those who are particularly vulnerable, what your behaviour and exclusions data is telling you, and whether there are any trends and patterns which suggest to you underlying safeguarding concerns, or that your policies and procedures either aren't working or perhaps aren't being communicated on the ground in a way that meets your expectations and creates that culture of safeguarding that I was talking about earlier. So use the evidence at your disposal. Talk to people, talk to your pupils on visits, talk to your parents and your staff. They will tell you so much about how they feel about school, how they feel about the environment, and how it keeps them safe, crucially, and their first-hand account about how your policies and procedures and the culture that you're trying to create is actually working. And of course, you benefit then from that wider local insight. Local authorities, safeguarding teams and support services do fantastic work up and down the country, and I know do a great work to support their schools. So obviously engage with those local authority briefings, those local authority communications, your trust-wide networks, and indeed other networks that will help you build your understanding and capacity for effective safeguarding practice and policy development. And of course, the visibility part, making sure that this is routine business on your agendas, and making sure that safeguarding isn't just discussed as an issue in its own right, but the safeguarding implications for all the policy developments, for all decisions you make, are considered in the same way that you probably think about pupils with special educational needs and disabilities, that concept of thinking send for every decision that you take. Well, it's the same principle here. Think safeguarding. What's the safeguarding implications rather for this particular decision, this particular policy that we're considering amending, adopting, or developing? Does that have an impact on what we're trying to achieve in our duty to keep pupils and young people safe? And of course, the safeguarding governor and trustee is not, as I said earlier, the person on whose shoulders the responsibility rests solely. But what they do provide as the board's specialist on safeguarding, as the link, is a coordinating role for this monitoring and oversight that you provide, because they're staying up to date and themselves on what the relevant guidance and policy changes are, keeping children safe in education changes, what they actually mean in your context, their links, their regular routine catch-ups and meetings and conversations with the DSL. The learning from that is being fed back into the governing board and informing those strategic conversations, decisions, and indeed the challenge. They're ensuring that safeguarding doesn't slip off the agenda, and as I was saying earlier, that it's considered more widely, not just as an issue in its own right. And they are basically being a role model for the type of governing oversight that you want and indeed need, that is organised, that is robust, and is visible to ensure that you are meeting your expectations as a board. So the safeguarding governor has a really important responsibility. I would recommend that you look at that example role description, because that includes contains some more details. But that think about that role as a role model and as a coordinator of activity, and you won't go too far wrong. And indeed, you'll make the most of it to ensure that the board collectively is meeting their responsibility and safeguarding is visible. So I'm going to hand back to Ronnie at that point.
Thanks, Steve. So in summary, governing boards need to ensure that safeguarding policies and procedures in their school or trust are effective and comply with the law at all times. All staff understand their roles and responsibilities and are able to discharge them, and that the board has sufficient knowledge and capacity to fulfil its safeguarding responsibilities. Although Steve has mentioned it, before we finish, I wanted to reiterate the importance of having the right culture at every level within a school or trust. How a governing board approaches safeguarding will help set the culture for the rest of the school or trust, and so they need to have the right approach. There needs to be an overarching culture of safeguarding, and governors and trustees need to assure themselves that it's been properly embedded. An effective safeguarding culture is one where safeguarding is threaded throughout everything the school or trust does. It's safeguarding and child protection underpinning all elements of school life and placing the interests of the pupil at the centre. It's about pupils feeling confident to approach a member of staff if they have a worry or a problem. It's about staff being able to know what they need to raise and who they need to raise it to. And it's about fostering an environment where staff not only know how to raise an issue, but they remain vigilant and they're acting on all safeguarding concerns. If the above is done well, then this will go a long way to ensuring that safeguarding practice is robust and effective throughout your setting. A final point about training, I mentioned e-learning earlier, and I'm pleased to announce that our new Learning Link module, Safeguarding, How to Fulfil the Governance Role, will be available tomorrow. This is a 60-minute introductory course consisting of short units, which will focus on what those governing need to know and do in order to fulfil their safeguarding role. It covers policies, procedures, and practice in all types of settings. Users will explore how the board should approach safeguarding and will be provided with useful questions and templates to help them gain the confidence necessary to contribute effectively to safeguarding in their school or trust. A reminder of our upcoming events. So there are a few coming up, but I just want to draw your attention to our annual conference. This will be an in-person event in Birmingham, and so you'll have the chance to network with fellow governors, trustees, clerks, and other governance professionals. The conference will be taking place on Saturday, 12th of November, and then will then be followed by our AGM. So that's all that's left. So all that's left really is to thank you all for attending. And if there is anything that you wish to discuss further, please feel free to email me. So thank you very much for attending and enjoy the rest of your day.